that didn't last too long, did it? The fence around the federal courthouse is back. The nightly protests are back. And an old tactic police used to detain people is also back. And we can all agree on the problem. Homelessness. It's the solutions that continue to divide us, like the new proposal for bigger shelters and more camps all over Portland, even in parks.
Is this the kind of values that we have as a community? Is this what our vision is for the city of Portland?
And let's check in on how the vaccine rollout is going in Oregon's tribal communities, because they've got some different eligibility rules than the rest of the state. Here's the story.
I want to hear from you tonight. I want to hear what you got to say. Give me your opinions, your critiques, all that kind of stuff. Hope your weekend was nice. Mine was pretty nice. Thanks for being with us. I'm Dan Haggerty. This is The Story. All the ways to communicate with us are at the bottom of your screen right now. You can use that hashtag HeyDan on Twitter, reach out on email at thestory@kgw.com, all that kind of stuff. In the meantime, let's get to the big story. So the riots are back. Shocking. I know. And we're hearing this kind of newish term. Maybe you've heard it as we've been discussing this over the weekend and into today. It's about these local clashes, something called kettling. It describes both a controversial tactic used by police and the screaming, whistling noise I made when I realized this polarizing tightrope of a topic was back in my nightly news diet. Anywho, here's what happened. See, on Friday night, a group of about 100 people dressed in black marched in the street, and some of those people started breaking windows and fighting with police officers. Now, instead of dispersing the crowd like they usually do, police trapped them there. Okay, they kept everybody right in that area. No one could leave until they talked to police. This is a tactic called kettling. Officers took everyone's photo, they took everybody's name, and they found a bunch of stuff like loaded guns and smoke bombs, a dagger, a slingshot, a hammer, a spray paint, that sort of thing. Now, I bet you have questions. I hope you have questions. I had a bunch of questions like, can they do that? Can they just like trap everybody there? I mean, don't look at me for the answer. I didn't know. I'm just a TV guy. So I called a smart person to try and answer it for me. Someone who spent 5 years as a public defender, studied at UPenn and Yale, I've heard those are decent, and currently teaches law at Willamette University. And I asked, is kettling legal?
Totally legal. I understand people don't like it, but that is different from actually being against the Fourth Amendment or the Fifth Amendment or the First Amendment. And those are the three amendments that these groups are claiming that were violated.
Okay, totes legal. That's what she said. She's the expert. That's about as legal as you can get. But, you know, the ACLU and some other civil rights groups, they don't think so. They're calling for a federal investigation into the Portland Police Bureau here. They've called this aggressive and indiscriminate, arguing that there were peaceful protesters who were there, legal observers, there were journalists. All of those people were also detained and forced to show ID.
I feel bad for the peaceful protesters, but I think you should know if you are in a situation where people start doing things that are illegal, your First Amendment rights will not magically save you from being asked to give identification.
Now, I've seen a lot of opinions on this, a lot of spins kind of on this topic from the public, you know, Twitter and Facebook and that sort of thing, and from some various journalists, sometimes around the country, because a lot of people are weighing in on this right now. And you can feel any sort of way you want to feel about kettling, about this tactic, whether you like it or not. But I want you to understand the law. You see, in 2017, police used this kettling tactic, and it prompted 2 civil lawsuits from it. One of them from the ACLU. They've weighed in on this sort of thing before, but both of them got thrown out. That's a big deal.
Basically, it's been dismissed. And so
Right.
The law is now, you're not getting anywhere with this argument. I mean, that's you know, they're saying that this violates First Amendment rights. The problem is even if you personally are walking peacefully, if the group of people you are with are destroying things, wrecking things, attacking officers, you are now liable to be collected with them. And what you do when you're kettling, the complaint this time was that they didn't injure any of the protesters, as far as we know. but they did ask for their names and they took pictures. In other words, they asked for their identification. Now, the Supreme Court law in a case called Hibble versus Nevada says that a police officer during a stop may ask for identification and can, in fact, arrest if identification is not given. And this more or less follows Portland and Oregon law, which says that you can't arrest someone for not giving their information, but they can continue to detain you until you do.
So there you have it. I mean, like I said before, you don't have to like it. You don't have to not like it. Regardless, I'm wondering if it's going to work, if it's going to make a difference kind of in the long run here, because at this point, the way I see it, it seems that the only thing that's going to stop the destruction that we're seeing downtown will be these various police tactics and then the community's willingness to embrace them. What I mean is, if we hope to end the violence by appeasing the demands of the protesters, well, I'm not quite sure where to start on that. Like Arlene, for instance, emailed me and said, I haven't heard what these individuals are protesting about, but I may have missed that part of the story. I do want to start by saying, before I get into that we saw a handful of peaceful protests this weekend. All right, we covered one on Saturday. You probably saw it here on KGW. We covered it on Saturday at Revolution Hall, and it was about the death of Breonna Taylor. A peaceful demonstration, one of many that are still happening in this city. But in terms of these marches that turn violent, most of them, right, they don't seem to have that same focus. And to appease the demands of those people, based on what I have seen and read and witnessed, we'd have to abolish police and abolish prisons and end capitalism and shut down DHS and open up the borders and eliminate ICE and stop sending oil through pipelines and not elect Donald Trump and not elect Joe Biden and a lot of other stuff. Now look, I kind of want to work on this week. I'm putting together some more information to further this story, and I'd like to hear from you. If you have an opinion, if you think I've missed something, if I'm not looking at it in an angle that you think I should, let me know. Reach out using that hashtag, HeyDan. Hey, let's talk about some solutions right now, although not everyone would agree. See, city officials would call this a solution, but some of you just don't see it that way. Michelle, for instance, emailed us and said, I'm concerned about the upcoming Portland City Council meeting March 17th, which will address the shelter to housing continuum zoning code changes. She said, I also do not believe that Portlanders are aware of this sweeping change to the zoning code and the possible changes this could bring to their neighborhoods. Michelle, thank you for writing in. So, given that conversations around municipal code aren't exactly riveting, she may be right. All right, a lot of people may not be familiar with this. See, this Wednesday, the Portland City Council will discuss a proposal to allow shelters and camps in more places around the city. Maggie Vespa has a deeper look at the idea.
In the midst of a housing crisis that appears worse than ever, Portland City Commissioners are eyeing permanent changes to city code. If adopted, these changes would largely eliminate zoning restrictions on homeless shelters and city-sanctioned camps, allowing agencies and nonprofits to open them faster and without public comment, basically all over the city. Officials say it would, in essence, cement shortcuts currently allowed under Portland's housing emergency, an emergency that's been going steady for 5 years now.
That you can't be perpetually in a state of emergency. We have to find a new normal at some point.
The pitch is called the Shelter to Housing Continuum Proposal. S2HC for short. One big flashpoint, it would allow for organized camps run by agencies or nonprofits to set up in parks. They'd be temporary, allowed to stay for 180 days max. Still, it's a point that's flooding our inbox with complaints and fueling frustration at neighborhood meetings.
This is the new normal. This is where we're going. This is an outrage.
Eric Engstrom is a principal planner with the city. He points out, again, that clause allows for temporary organized camps similar to the Kenton Women's Village in parks or open space zones. The terminology often conjures up images of neighborhood parks with playgrounds, but that's not necessarily accurate, Engstrom says.
Not all land that is zoned open space is a formal developed park. There is some ODOT and Metro land that's undeveloped that is in open space zoning. Again, I don't think there's an intent to convert parks to camps.
Still, it's far from the only detail prompting pushback.
This needs to be shared evenly throughout the entire city.
Bob Ernest is with the Hazelwood Neighborhood Association in Northeast Portland. His big concern, this map produced by the city. It shows the parts of Portland that under these code changes have the most potential for future shelter sites. Areas shaded in yellow have a lot of options. You'll notice outer East Portland is pretty much all yellow. Ernest argues it's proof the code changes put too much of the burden on East Portland, which is nothing new.
We have no political clout. We're invisible.
And he argues the area lacks supportive services needed to help people in shelters find stability.
The wraparound service is key. Just placing a site and dumping people there, that's going to just create more chaos.
City and county officials point out the map in no way means shelters will open at these sites. It means untapped potential is there. The city council is planning to hear public comment on this Wednesday and possibly next week as well. They're hoping to vote on these proposed code changes at the end of the month. Maggie Vespa, KGW News.
All right, let's check in on the vaccine, right? As of this afternoon, we like to do the count. More than 865,000 Oregonians have gotten at least their first dose. About 3/4 of them have gotten the second dose. But this puts us at, what, 20.3% of the state of Oregon right now? People with at least that first shot. That's a good milestone, right? 20%, I like that. Now in Washington, more than 1.4 million people have gotten at least their first dose. That works out to be about 19% of Washington's population. Now, let's take a closer look at these numbers because we've been getting some questions about the vaccine, how it's being distributed, equity, that sort of thing, especially among marginalized groups. See, Native Americans make up about 1.8% of Oregon's total population. And right now, according to OHA, 2% of all people vaccinated in this state are Native Americans. Now, your first kind of inkling when you look at those numbers is think, yeah, that pretty much matches up, right? But the numbers don't tell really the whole story, especially for individual tribes. So I talked to Pat Doris about that today. Okay, Pat, thanks for joining us. So you talked to 3 tribes about their vaccination efforts, kind of what they're doing right now. What are you hearing from them? What did they tell you?
Well, first off, I was happy to hear that they're getting as much vaccine as they need. So a couple of them are getting them from the state through the OHA. One is going directly through the federal government. It's also interesting that even though they potentially have 100% where they could cover their entire population, they don't have near that number that are actually getting the vaccination. The Grand Ronde have about 58% of their members vaccinated so far. That was by far the highest. The others are down in the 20s or maybe low 30s. And so when I asked them why that is, they said it's kind of the historic mistrust of the medical system is one of the big reasons that's a hurdle to overcome.
What are they going to do about that? Because, of course, we've seen that in, really every sector of life, everything from nurses to teachers, and now we're talking about it with the tribal community. What is their plan to kind of overcome that and make sure people are getting vaccinated?
Well, they've been doing kind of a publicity campaign trying to convince people, look, this is science, this is safe, this is not going to hurt you. But what they're finding what really works is when people see their neighbors have gotten the shot and nothing happens to them, and maybe, in fact, they don't get sick. That's the most convincing thing so far. So in the meantime, the tribes just continue to push that message. They continue to try and have mass vaccination events. And they're also now expanding to the communities around their reservations and their tribal centers under the theory that if you vaccinate a lot of the people that are around us, you'll help protect the actual people on the reservation.
That was going to be my next follow-up question, because we've been hearing these reports that they're actually opening up the vaccines that they have to members of the general public, so people who aren't necessarily in the tribe. What do you know about that? How exactly is that working?
Well, so far, I think it's working quite well. For example, I know that the Grand Ronde have a mass vaccination event tomorrow, and you can sign up. I don't know if there's any slots available, but you can sign up on their Facebook page. And I know that a lot of fraternity members, for example, at Oregon State in Corvallis, which is not far from the reservation, a lot of those guys have signed up for that and are actually getting vaccinated. And the Grand Ronde tribe says, we have the vaccine. If members of the community want to come and get it, we're happy to help them out.
So they're not really sticking to the same guidelines that you find elsewhere. How's that all? How do you figure all that working?
Well, they're sovereign nations, so they can do whatever they want. And what I've heard is that they, prioritized common sense. So they went for the most fragile and the elders and all that. But after a while, they get to the point where they're like, okay, now, whichever it is, 16 and above or 18 and above, whatever the vaccines say, anybody that wants it can have it now.
Got it. Pat Doris, thank you, sir. Appreciate the report.
My pleasure.
When you move across the country, you bring a lot of stuff with you, even some of the things you'd rather leave behind. Just ask OSU's new president, who's getting a lot of heat for something that happened while he was in his old job. Also, remember that big eclipse over Oregon? No, not the one from a few years ago. I'm talking about the one back in 1979. When the story continues.
I usually spend the commercial breaks off camera looking at my phone, trying to find a couple of comments, some things I might want to address at the end of the show. So please keep them coming. And also, if you get on Twitter and you just search the hashtag HeyDan, you can see some of the other things that everybody else is writing into us and start a conversation with them. That's part of the whole community we're trying to build here. And if you're not tech savvy, that's okay. Send me mail. All right, I love getting mail, just like everybody. In fact, I miss getting mail. So send me your story ideas that way, and we'll get them on the show. Now, you might have heard the president of Oregon State University is facing the possibility of losing his job this week. And I'm talking about F. King Alexander. We told you about his story last Friday. And to be clear, he is still working right now. But the Board of Trustees is meeting this week to discuss his job. And they want to hear from you. Yeah, now look, here's the background. It's all because Alexander used to be the president of Louisiana State University, and a report from an investigation into the school showed a lot of missteps in handling a sexual misconduct claim, several of them. One of those cases, former coach there, Les Miles, who was fired from the University of Kansas after that report came out earlier this month. See, while Miles was coaching at LSU, the athletic director recommended he be fired because of inappropriate behavior with female students, but President Alexander chose not to fire him at the time. So now the report is out, and a lot of people are wondering if Alexander should also be fired from now his new job at OSU. An advocate we talked to last week is afraid that claims of sexual assault won't be taken seriously under his presidency there. But after we aired this story last Friday, one of our viewers, Laura, emailed us and said, so now we're going to fire someone for something that might happen. And that's a fair question. So now you have a chance to weigh in. OSU is taking public comment during their board meeting on Wednesday afternoon. It's virtual. All you got to do is register. You can sign up. If you have something to say, you can say it. After that, they'll be discussing the matter privately, and then they'll come back into a public session. And they say that they may take action. So we're just going to have to wait to see what happens and wait to see what you have to say. It's Sunshine Week right now. No, we're not talking about the weather, though it has been sunny out. We're also not talking about daylight saving time either. I'm so tired today. It's never why did it affect me more this year than years past? Maybe I'm just being dramatic, which would be par for the course. But see, Sunshine Week actually refers to access to public records laws. They're called sunshine laws. Sunshine laws are very important to people like me. Journalists, it's our bread and butter. It's how we're able to get the information that we put in our stories. But they're also important to you for other than the obvious I just stated. You see, sunshine laws dictate how transparent your government is. If you can easily take a look at all kinds of different records that they have, then you can see for yourself how the government is being run. Oregon's public records law says that every person has a right to access public records, although there are some exemptions, things like trade secrets or ongoing criminal cases. The state, though, has 15 days to respond to your request, although they can get an extension, but they're allowed to charge a fee for the time it takes to prepare the records for you. But a lot of legal battles have been fought over how much that fee should be and how long the office should be able to take to get you those records. Oregon actually has an appointed public records advocate, but it's got an interesting history. It's a relatively new job. The office was created in the wake of former Governor John Kitzhaber's resignation. But the first public records advocate, Ginger McCall, quit after 18 months. She said that she was getting too much pressure from the now governor's office to take the governor's side in disputes over public records. And then the next public records advocate quit because journalists thought that she wasn't independent enough. Now the office is led by Todd Albert. So we asked him how independent he thinks the office should be.
I think the office does need strong legs to stand on its own. All government offices exist within a political framework. That's just the nature of things. And even if the legislation that is pending right now, Senate Bill 500, passes, that would make the office independent. Myself, as a public records advocate, is still accountable to our advisory council, which many of whom are actually appointed by the governor. So it's not as if the office would be free to just go do what it wants. It still exists within this necessary framework of checks and balances. But I think it is necessary for anyone doing this role as advocate, either myself or those that come after me, to understand that they can give the best advice that they think necessary when it comes to dealing with public records issues, whether it's resolving disputes, writing policies, or suggesting changes to the law, without looking back over their shoulder and wondering what any one elected official will think about what they're saying.
Now, there are a number of bills in session right now that have to do with your access to public records, and we're going to be talking about them a little later this week, and we want to know what questions you might have about accessing public records. I know that doesn't really sound all that information. It doesn't sound that, what word am I trying to think of? Interesting? They're in my ear. My producers are throwing like a thesaurus words at me. Interesting is what I was going for, but it is interesting and it's important, and other words that start with I. So send us emails. Use that hashtag HeyDan, and you can critique the way I do this show, which I get to. So, all right. Now, another story about sunshine, and yeah, this time I am talking about the actual sun. I bet some of you were living here, about 42 years ago when the big solar eclipse happened. We're going to dive into the KGW Vault and finish the story next. All right, we're going to get to your comments in just a minute. First, well, welcome back, first of all. Also, I was curious, how many of you were here when there was a big solar eclipse that happened in 2017? It was pretty cool. I wasn't here, but I know Oregon had a great view of it. I looked up some stuff today, and apparently people in southern Oregon are going to be able to see another one in October of 2023. That's just a couple of years away. So mark your calendars if you'd like. Now, solar eclipses, they're rare. They don't really happen all that often, but we did find one in the KGW Vault that you could see from Portland in 1979.
And this morning, we are bringing you live coverage of the total eclipse of the sun. We see behind us now a shot from an airplane over Portland at an altitude exceeding that of the cloud cover that now covers most of the city. Boyd Levitt is in Goldendale, Washington. Let's see if he can talk to us now. Boyd?
So, we have hundreds of amateurs here on the top of Observatory Hill in Goldendale. They've been in sleeping bags, they've brought their breakfast, they have their little cook stoves, many of them with tripods and cameras and telescopes. Most of them amateurs, Don, and most never before, just like most of us, having seen a total eclipse of the sun.
The next one visible on the United States, from the continental United States, will be in the year 2018. That one will fall along the east coast.
A lot of folks looking out their window right now, and it is a safe assumption, I think, that a lot of work isn't getting done.
That tiny sliver of light is the sun, 93 million miles away, all but obliterated by the moon. Very much smaller than the sun, but only 200,000 miles away, and thereby almost matching it in size. That's the last sliver of the sun disappearing in downtown Portland. The skyline, as shot from the roof of KGW's transmitter building, and the corona, the solar corona, the diamond ring effect. And we try to lock onto that shot. That's an incredible shot. And the skies in Goldendale, Washington, as the totality phase approaches there. They are 2 minutes behind Portland. As you can see, barely see, almost imperceptible, the light fade in Goldendale. Boyd?
Yes, Don.
I hear that you saw the shadow of the moon approach you there in Goldendale.
We, Don, are on very high ground here on the top of Observatory Hill in Goldendale, where, incidentally, the sun has just now come back again. And we could look to the west for, my estimate is a good 95 to 100 miles, and we could see that shadow hurtling out of the west. It's something that you don't know how to describe, this massive darkness coming at you.
When it got dark, any fear go through your mind, or what was your reaction?
I got a little shaky. I actually did get a little shaky because it was light and then it got totally dark, and it was just such a, incredible feeling.
This is what the eclipse looked like as we saw it just a few moments back above Portland. That is the shot of the corona, usually invisible except during a total eclipse.
That was cool. I mean, just as a news guy, I love looking back and watching the way the news was covered. I love the one reporter was like, it's safe to say no one in that building is doing any work. Hey, is that report done? There's an eclipse, dude, in a minute.
So a couple of comments. This one from Christina Sell. She said, "Hey Dan, I have a hard time hearing you when you point at me whilst talking." That's not cool. Do I point a lot while I'm talking? I don't. Involuntary. And then Dr. Melinda Davis said, "Hey Dan, thanks for covering actual local news on the story. Vaccinations, homelessness, kettling, the continued vandalism downtown, and that's just today." My husband and I say thank you. Well, thank you for weighing in and for watching. And you're right. I mean, there is so much happening in this city. I tell people all the time how important the local news is. I know that everybody wants to watch the big national news outlets and hear about what's going on in the country and world, and that's really important. But the stuff in our own backyard is what we can have the biggest impact on right now. So if there are things you think we should cover, if you have opinions about what we have covered, please let me know. Use that hashtag, HeyDan. That's the story for tonight. See you back here tomorrow.